As usual, if you like these stories or it felt meaningful to you, feel free to like, share, and comment your thoughts below, as well as subscribe to our channel. It could be a huge support for our work. Now, let's just enjoy the stories.
She was shivering on the cold Chicago pavement, her luggage tossed out like trash. 7 years of marriage erased over one devastating word: infertile. But as freezing rain masked her tears, a matte black Maybach rolled to a halt, and the city's most feared man stepped out into the dark. The clinical white walls of Dr. Harrison Evans' fertility clinic on the Upper East Side had become a second home to Audrey Preston. For 3 years, she had endured the agonizing cycle of hope and despair. Her stomach was perpetually mottled with purple bruises from the daily hormone injections, her body a battleground in the desperate war to give her husband Nate the heir his affluent family demanded. Nate Preston was the golden boy of Chicago real estate, charming, ruthless, and entirely obsessed with his legacy. But lately, his charm had curdled into a cold, suffocating resentment. That Tuesday afternoon, the silence in the doctor's office was deafening. Dr. Evans, a man who usually exuded warm, practiced empathy, wouldn't meet Audrey's eyes. He shuffled the manila folder on his desk, clearing his throat. "Audrey, Nate," Dr. Evans began, his voice tight. "The results of the latest biopsy and ovarian reserve testing are back. I'm incredibly sorry. The damage from the recurrent cyst bursts is extensive. The chance of natural conception, or even success with further IVF, is 0. Audrey, you are completely sterile." The word dropped like an anvil in the small room. 0. Audrey felt the air leave her lungs. She reached out instinctively for Nate's hand, seeking the warmth of the man who had promised to stand by her through better or worse. Instead, Nate stood up. He didn't look at her. He didn't offer a shoulder to cry on. He simply buttoned his bespoke Tom Ford suit jacket and looked at the doctor. "Thank you, Harrison. The check will be cleared by morning," Nate said, his voice as sterile as the room. "Nate?" Audrey whispered, her vision blurring with tears. He didn't answer. He walked out, leaving her sitting alone in the heavy, crushing silence. The nightmare truly began when Audrey arrived back at their multi-million-dollar Astor Street penthouse. The heavy oak doors swung open not to a comforting home, but to an ambush. Standing in the foyer, dripping in Chanel and condescension, was Beatrice Preston, Nate's mother. Beside Beatrice stood 3 large suitcases, packed and zipped, Audrey's suitcases. "What is going on?" Audrey asked, her voice trembling, still reeling from the medical diagnosis. Nate stood by the marble fireplace, pouring a glass of scotch. "I filed the paperwork an hour ago, Audrey. My lawyers have already pushed it through the initial stages." "Paperwork?" "Nate, we just got the worst news of our lives 2 hours ago." "The worst news of your life," Beatrice corrected, her voice dripping with venom. "You hid this from us. You knew you were broken merchandise when you married my son. The Preston lineage requires blood, not a barren charity case." "I didn't hide anything. We've been trying for years," Audrey cried, the betrayal slicing through her chest. "Nate, please. We can adopt. We can use a surrogate. We love each other." Nate finally looked at her, his eyes devoid of the man she thought she married. "Love doesn't inherit the Preston empire, Audrey." The prenuptial agreement was clear. Clause 14. Failure to produce a biological heir within 7 years results in an uncontested dissolution of marriage with 0 alimony. You bring nothing to this family anymore. "You're throwing me out? Tonight? It's pouring rain, Nate. Where am I supposed to go?" "That," Nate said, taking a sip of his scotch, "is no longer my problem. Leave the keys on the console." 2 of Nate's security guards stepped out from the shadows of the hallway. They didn't lay a hand on her, but the threat was clear. Numb with shock, stripped of her dignity, her home, and her future in the span of an afternoon, Audrey was escorted out of the building. The heavy glass doors of the lobby shut behind her with a sickening click. She was standing on the pavement of the Gold Coast, the freezing October rain soaking through her thin trench coat, her 3 suitcases piled haphazardly beside her. 7 years of devotion, erased. The rain in Chicago didn't just fall, it bit. Audrey sat on her overturned suitcase, the streetlights reflecting off the slick, black asphalt. She had tried calling her sister, but it went straight to voicemail. Her bank cards, all tied to Nate's joint accounts, had already been frozen. She had $20 in her purse and a dead phone. A cruel, bitter laugh escaped her lips. She wasn't just heartbroken, she was erased. Through the blur of the torrential downpour, the headlights of a vehicle cut through the darkness. It wasn't a taxi. It was a massive, armored, matte black Maybach. It glided silently to the curb, stopping mere inches from where Audrey sat trembling. The rear window rolled down slowly. The interior of the car was cast in shadows, but Audrey could make out the sharp, aristocratic profile of a man. The scent of leather and cedarwood drifted out into the damp air. The Gold Coast is no place for a woman to be sitting alone at midnight. Audrey, a deep, gravelly voice said over the sound of the rain. Audrey scrambled backward, her heart hammering against her ribs. "Who are you? How do you know my name?" The car door swung open. A man stepped out into the downpour, ignoring the rain that immediately darkened the shoulders of his immaculately tailored black suit. He was tall, broadly built, with piercing, obsidian eyes that seemed to absorb the streetlights. He held a large black umbrella, stepping forward to shield her from the storm. It was Cassian Moretti. Audrey gasped, pressing her back against the wrought iron fence. She had never met him, but she had seen his face in whispers and hushed conversations at Nate's high society galas. Cassian Moretti was the head of the Moretti Syndicate. To the public, he was a ruthless logistics billionaire. To the underground, he was the judge, jury, and executioner of the Eastern Seaboard. "Nate owes me a substantial amount of money, Audrey," Cassian said, his tone conversational, as if they were discussing the weather rather than a blood debt. "I've been watching his house for a week. Imagine my surprise when I see the pristine Mrs. Preston thrown out onto the street like yesterday's garbage." Audrey raised her chin, refusing to show fear despite her violent shivering. "If you're looking for collateral, you're out of luck. My ex-husband made it very clear tonight that I am of no value to him." Cassian's eyes flicked down to her soaked clothes, then to the bags. A strange, unreadable emotion flashed in his dark eyes. "Nate is a fool," Cassian said softly. "A blind, arrogant fool." He stepped closer, the umbrella now fully covering them both. The warmth radiating from him was a stark contrast to the freezing night. "You have nothing. No money, no home, and knowing Nate, he's already preparing a smear campaign to ensure high society turns its back on you by morning." Audrey swallowed hard. "Why are you telling me this?" "Because," Cassian reached out, his gloved hand gently lifting her chin so she was forced to look into his dangerous eyes. "I am a man who appreciates the value of things that others discard. Nate Preston thinks he can default on a debt to me and dispose of his wife on the same night without consequences." He dropped his hand and gestured to the open door of the Maybach. "Come with me, Audrey." "What? No, I don't know you. You're a criminal." A dark, dangerous smile played on Cassian's lips. "I am. But I'm a criminal offering you a warm bed, a hot meal, and a chance to survive the night. Your golden boy husband just left you to freeze on the pavement. Which one of us is the real monster tonight?" Thunder rumbled overhead. Audrey looked down the empty, affluent street. No one was coming for her. The world she knew was dead. "If I get in that car," Audrey asked, her voice barely a whisper over the rain, "what do you want from me?" "I want the keys to Nate Preston's downfall," Cassian replied smoothly. "You spent 7 years by his side. You know his secrets. You know his passwords, his hidden accounts, the skeletons in his mother's closet. Help me tear his empire to the ground, and in return, I will give you a new life. One where no one will ever throw you out again." It was a deal with the devil. But as the freezing wind whipped around her, Audrey realized she had already been living in hell. She stood up, leaving her designer luggage behind on the sidewalk. She didn't need it anymore. "All right," Audrey said, stepping into the warm, leather-scented darkness of the Maybach. "Let's burn him to the ground." Cassian closed the door behind her, sealing her fate, and stepped into the front. The Maybach peeled away from the curb, leaving the ruins of Audrey's old life in the rearview mirror. She didn't know it yet, but the biggest twist of her life was waiting for her because Dr. Evans hadn't been telling the truth, and Cassian Moretti's interest in her was far deeper than just a business transaction. The Moretti estate in Lake Forest was a fortress of limestone and iron, hidden behind acres of dense, ancient pines. Inside, it was a masterpiece of dark mahogany, imported Italian marble, and quiet, lethal efficiency. For the first week, Audrey walked the expansive halls like a ghost. The trauma of her sudden displacement and the cruel diagnosis clung to her, a heavy, suffocating shroud. But Cassian Moretti did not treat her like a fragile, broken thing. He treated her like a weapon that simply needed sharpening. He gave her the master suite in the East Wing, unrestricted access to his private chefs, and a wardrobe filled with designer labels that made her old life look pedestrian. More importantly, he gave her the keys to his war room. It was late on a Thursday night. The fire crackled in the hearth of Cassian's study, casting long, dancing shadows across the walls. Audrey sat at a massive oak table, surrounded by stacks of financial dossiers, shell company records, and offshore banking statements belonging to Preston Real Estate Holdings. Her sharp mind, which Nate had always dismissed as merely decorative, was meticulously unraveling the fraudulent empire her ex-husband had built. Cassian stood by the window, a glass of amber bourbon in his hand, watching her with an intensity that made the air in the room feel thick. He wore a crisp white dress shirt with the sleeves rolled up, revealing intricate, dark tattoos climbing up his forearms, a stark contrast to the boardroom billionaires she was used to. "You've found something," Cassian stated. It wasn't a question. He had learned to read the subtle shifts in her posture, the narrowing of her emerald eyes. Audrey looked up, tapping a manicured fingernail against a ledger. Nate's liquid assets are a mirage. He's been moving capital from the commercial developments into a series of Cayman accounts to hide them from the IRS and apparently from you. But that's not what caught my eye. She pulled a single sheet of paper from the stack. 3 days before I was thrown out, a wire transfer of $5 million was made from Beatrice Preston's personal trust. Cassian walked over, the scent of cedar and danger preceding him. He leaned over her shoulder, his proximity sending a sudden, electric shiver down her spine. "To whom?" "That's the thing," Audrey whispered, her voice tightening. "It went to a shell corporation called Horizon Medical Ventures. I dug into the corporate registry." She looked up, her eyes wide with a horrific realization. "The sole proprietor of Horizon Medical Ventures is Dr. Harrison Evans." Silence stretched between them, heavy and absolute. "Silas," Cassian called out, without raising his voice. The heavy mahogany doors opened instantly, and Cassian's chief intelligence officer, a lean, sharp-eyed man named Silas Sterling, stepped in. "Boss, hack the servers at Dr. Evans' Upper East Side clinic. I want Audrey's complete, unredacted medical files, not the ones they handed her, the raw lab data from the pathologists. I want them 10 minutes ago. Consider it done." Silas vanished, shutting the doors behind him. Audrey felt the room spinning. "Cassian, what does this mean? Why would Beatrice pay my fertility doctor $5 million? Cassian knelt beside her chair, taking her cold hands in his warm, calloused ones. "Audrey, in the world I operate in, $5 million buys one thing, a very expensive lie." 20 agonizing minutes later, Silas returned holding a secure tablet. He handed it to Cassian, his expression grim. Cassian's dark eyes scanned the glowing screen. His jaw clenched, a muscle feathering dangerously at his cheek. He let out a low, dark breath before turning the tablet toward Audrey. "Read the pathology summary from your last biopsy," Cassian instructed gently. Audrey took the tablet, her hands shaking so badly the text blurred. She forced her eyes to focus on the medical jargon. Ovarian reserve, optimal. Uterine lining, healthy. Fallopian pathways, unobstructed. Diagnosis, exceptional reproductive health. "I don't understand." A tear slipped down her cheek, landing on the glass screen. He told me I was sterile. He said the cysts were a minor, treatable issue that he deliberately exaggerated, Cassian said, his voice dropping to a lethal, icy whisper. You are perfectly healthy, Audrey. You were never infertile. Then why didn't we ever— She stopped. The truth slammed into her with the force of a freight train. Cassian swiped the screen to the next file. Because Silas also pulled Nate's records from a private specialist in Boston 3 years ago. Non-obstructive azoospermia. Nate is completely, irreversibly sterile. A sob tore from Audrey's throat. 7 years. 7 years of brutal hormone injections, bruising, depression, and self-hatred. Beatrice and Nate had watched her destroy her body and her mind, knowing all along that Nate was the one who was barren. They had paid $5 million to gaslight her, to blame her, and ultimately to trigger the morality clause in the prenup to throw her out penniless. Why? Audrey cried out, the betrayal burning her from the inside out. Why go to all this trouble just to divorce me? Because of her, Cassian swiped the tablet one last time, bringing up a high-resolution surveillance photo. It was Nate, looking ecstatic, holding the waist of a stunning, blonde socialite, Vivienne Croft. And Vivienne was very clearly sporting a baby bump. Vivienne is 4 months pregnant, Cassian explained. Nate needed a pristine public image to take over his father's board seat next month. A messy divorce over his own infidelity wouldn't fly. But a quiet divorce because his wife tragically couldn't provide an heir? That garners sympathy. He replaces the broken wife with the pregnant mistress, securing the legacy. Audrey stared at the photo. But if Nate is sterile, whose baby is Vivienne carrying? A dark, dangerous smirk finally broke through Cassian's stoic expression. That is the multi-million-dollar question, and it's the match we are going to use to burn Nate Preston's life to ashes. The grief inside Audrey evaporated, replaced by a sudden, terrifying, and glorious rage. She looked at Cassian, really looked at him. This ruthless, terrifying mafia boss had given her the truth her own family had denied her. "Help me destroy him," she whispered fiercely. Cassian reached out, his thumb gently wiping away the lone tear on her cheek. The touch was electric, sparking a fire that had been lying dormant inside her for years. "I've been waiting 5 years to hear you say that, Audrey." She blinked in confusion. 5 years? The Symphony Gala, Cassian murmured, his gaze dropping to her lips. "A rival syndicate tried to take me out in the gardens. I was bleeding out behind the rose bushes. A woman walked by, saw a man holding a gun wound, and instead of screaming for security, she took off her custom silk scarf, tied a tourniquet around my arm, and hid me until my men arrived." Audrey gasped. "That was you in the dark?" The man with the emerald cufflinks. "I survived because of you. I watched you walk back inside and take the arm of Nate Preston. I let you go because you looked happy. But I vowed that the moment he stopped making you smile, I would take you for myself." Cassian leaned in, the space between them vanishing. "You were never his, Audrey. You were just waiting for me." When Cassian's lips met hers, it wasn't a tentative spark. It was an inferno. It was the taste of power, of truth, and of absolute terrifying devotion. Audrey kissed him back with all the pent-up passion and fury inside her, finally stepping out of the shadow of her past and into the arms of the king of Chicago's underworld. 3 months later, the grand ballroom of the Drake Hotel was a sea of diamonds, tuxedos, and hypocrisy. The annual Platinum Charity Gala was the crown jewel of Chicago high society, and tonight it was supposed to be Nate Preston's coronation. Nate stood by the ice sculpture, practically glowing with arrogance. Beside him, Vivienne Croft clung to his arm, her baby bump proudly displayed beneath a tight, silver Givenchy gown. Beatrice Preston held court nearby, accepting early congratulations on the impending birth of her first legitimate grandchild. "It's a shame about Audrey," an older socialite murmured to Beatrice, taking a sip of champagne. "So tragic," Beatrice scoffed delicately. "Some women simply aren't built for the rigors of our lifestyle, darling. Nate needed a true partner. Vivienne is a godsend." Suddenly, the string quartet playing softly in the corner faltered to a jarring halt. The heavy, gilded doors of the ballroom swung open, and the ambient chatter of 400 elite guests died instantly. Standing in the entryway, flanked by 4 massive men in tailored black suits, was Cassian Mority. His presence alone was enough to drop the temperature in the room by 10 degrees. The elite feared him. They owed him money, favors, or their lives. But it wasn't Cassian who stole the breath from the room. It was the woman on his arm. Audrey looked like a dark, avenging goddess. She wore a backless, blood-red velvet gown that hugged every curve of her body, a body that was no longer bruised or defeated. Around her neck sat a staggering, 30-carat flawless emerald pendant. But the most shocking accessory of all was the undeniable, beautiful swell of her stomach. Audrey Preston was 4 months pregnant. A collective gasp echoed through the ballroom. Nate's champagne flute slipped from his fingers, shattering loudly against the marble floor. Beatrice turned the color of chalk. With lethal, measured grace, Cassian and Audrey walked down the grand staircase, parting the sea of billionaires like royalty. They didn't stop until they were standing directly in front of Nate, Vivienne, and Beatrice. "Audrey?" Nate choked out, his eyes darting frantically to her stomach. "What? What is this?" "Hello, Nate," Audrey smiled, a predatory, brilliant expression that made him take a physical step back. "I heard you were celebrating your legacy tonight. We thought we'd drop by to offer our congratulations." Beatrice stepped forward, her face contorted with rage. "You deceitful tramp! How dare you show your face here, flaunting some bastard child after you manipulated my son?" "Careful!" Beatrice, Cassian's voice was a low, vibrating threat that silenced the older woman instantly. "You are speaking to my fiancé, and the mother of my heir. I suggest you address her with the reverence she commands, or I will have your tongue removed." The absolute terror in Cassian's eyes made Beatrice physically recoil. Audrey stepped forward, locking eyes with her ex-husband. She reached into Cassian's breast pocket and pulled out a sleek black envelope. She handed it to Nate. "What is this?" Nate stammered, his hands shaking as he broke the seal. "That," Audrey announced, raising her voice just enough to carry to the eavesdropping crowd, "is a certified copy of your medical records from Boston, Nate. The ones detailing your complete, irreversible sterility." The silence in the room was absolute. Vivienne Croft dropped Nate's arm, her face draining of color. And attached to it, Audrey continued smoothly. "Are the bank records proving your mother transferred $5 million to Dr. Harrison Evans to fabricate a false infertility diagnosis for me, just so you could trigger the prenup and avoid a scandal?" Whispers erupted like wildfire across the ballroom. Cameras from the society press flashed frantically. "You're lying!" Nate shouted, though the panic in his eyes betrayed him. He turned to Vivienne. "Vivienne is carrying my child. We did IVF." Audrey let out a soft, mocking laugh. "Oh, Nate, you really are a fool. Turn to the 3rd page." Nate fumbled with the papers. His eyes scanned the document, and his knees visibly buckled. "Silas is very good with DNA registries," Audrey said, turning her gaze to the trembling Vivienne. "It turns out Vivienne's baby isn't yours, Nate. It belongs to your chief financial officer, Marcus. I suppose when you're sterile and your mistress needs to trap a billionaire, she has to outsource the labor." "No!" Vivienne screamed, bursting into tears as the crowd gasped in horror. Nate looked like he was going to be sick. The empire he had built on lies was disintegrating in real time, broadcasted to the most powerful people in the city. But Cassian wasn't finished. He stepped forward, towering over the broken man. "Preston Real Estate Holdings defaulted on a $300 million offshore loan this morning," Cassian stated, his voice ringing with cold authority. "A loan held by a holding company that I own. You are bankrupt, Nate. I have already seized your accounts, your properties, and the Astor Street penthouse." Cassian leaned in close to Nate's ear, though his voice carried to Audrey. "You threw my queen out onto the street in the rain. Tonight, you and your mother will leave this hotel with nothing but the clothes on your backs. You are erased." Nate let out a primal yell and lunged forward, fists raised toward Audrey. He never made it within 3 feet of her. Cassian's hand snapped out with terrifying speed, wrapping around Nate's throat and lifting him off his toes. Nate gagged, his face turning a deep purple as Cassian's grip tightened like a vice. "Cassian," Audrey said softly, placing a gentle hand on his tense, heavily muscled forearm. "Don't. He isn't worth the stain on your suit." Cassian held Nate for a second longer, ensuring the man understood exactly how close he was to death, before tossing him to the floor like a rag doll. Nate scrambled backward, coughing and gasping for air, clutching his bruised throat. Beatrice fell to her knees beside him, weeping hysterically as the elite crowd turned their backs on them in utter disgust. Audrey looked down at the ruins of the people who had tried to destroy her. There was no pity left in her heart, only closure. Cassian wrapped a protective, possessive arm around Audrey's waist, his large hand resting over the swell of her stomach where their child was growing safe and strong. "Ready to go home, Mia Regina?" Cassian murmured, pressing a kiss to her temple. Audrey smiled, resting her head against his chest, listening to the steady, powerful beating of his heart. "Yes, take me home." They turned and walked out of the ballroom, leaving the ashes of the Preston legacy behind them. Audrey had walked out into the freezing rain with nothing but broken dreams, but she was returning to the darkness with a crown. Did Audrey's brutal revenge satisfy your craving for drama? If you loved this story of betrayal, mafia romance, and ultimate karma, hit that like button and share it with your friends. Don't forget to subscribe to our channel for more intense, real-life inspired storytelling, shocking twists, and satisfying endings. Drop a comment below. What would you have done to Nate? See you in the next video.